Shalom, welcome back. We're going to expand on the previous presentation where we were looking at the various stages of how a religion is formed and how religions can go through these various changes over time. And I'm going to use that and apply it to the gate imagery that we see and hear spoken about by Yeshua and Peter, and see if we can't maybe get a little closer to understanding what they're saying. So the presentation last time was the information came primarily from this book, mostly from the introduction to the book, Ancient Israel's Faith and History by George Mendelsohn. It's a great book. I highly recommend getting a copy of it. You can buy a new copy for like $40. It's kind of an expensive book, but there was some used versions available on Amazon last time I checked. I'm presuming they're still there. At the time, you could have picked one up for $12 to $15, including shipping. So there may still be some of those left. But it's a good book. I highly recommend it. If you don't have the resources to purchase an actual print copy of it, I will put a link in the description where you can download a PDF version of it, and you can use that for free if you'd like to. So last time we looked at the 5 laws of religion. I'm not going to read all the information on the screen. You can pause it if you want to. But there's 5 laws: a law of transference, a law of functional shift, law of elaboration, a law of contrast, and the law of finality. And each one of these, in one way or another, can contribute to a type of corruption coming into a religious faith or teaching. And I would say that all of these laws, to some extent, have converted the faith that Yeshua originally taught into something much different now in the realm of mainstream Christianity. So once we went over the 5 laws, we looked at the 5 stages of how religions develop. We start with the prologue, which is basically the societal conditions that give birth to this new religious faith. Usually there's some type of a problem with the previous or the older version of the religion, and so it has to be more or less reborn into something new. After the prologue, then comes the formation of the religion itself. This is usually articulated by an individual who's either inspired or at the very least claims to be inspired. So like Yeshua, with the indwelling of the Holy Spirit and speaking the words of his Father, he came and presented this faith that his Father desired for us to practice. And then we have this other supposedly inspired individual, Saul of Tarsus, who comes along, and he is alleging to be teaching the same doctrines as Yeshua. Of course, if we look at them, they're very different. So I would say that whereas traditionally I have viewed religion, Yeshua and Paul as like Paul corrupting the faith of Yeshua, I'm now more of the opinion that I think that Paul just outright created a whole new religion. So the formative period, then you have the adaptive period, which is where changes are made. Some of these changes may be necessary as you go to new cultures. But sometimes these necessary changes can go a little too far and change the original meaning of the religion. You enter eventually a traditional period where everything kind of solidifies into a system of religion, and there's not a whole lot of change there until a Reformation comes along. Then the Reformation seeks to restore the lost functions or values of the religion back to its formative or adaptive period. And so that's kind of the key phrase there. Most reforms proclaim to restore it back to the formative period, but a lot of times they don't go far enough back. So let's apply what we've just went over to the religion that Yeshua introduced in the first century. And so here's what we've been told. We've been told that in the formative period, we had Yeshua, the 12 apostles, the Despozzini is the family of Yeshua, James, Mary, his brothers, and then we have the disciples. Disciples are students. Some people don't really understand the difference between apostles and disciples. A disciple is your student. An apostle is someone who is no longer really a student. They're now kind of like graduated. They've got their degree or whatever, and you're sending them out. So an apostle is someone the teacher sends out to teach others, versus a disciple, which a disciple is just a student. So the apostles started out as disciples, but then when they get educated with the doctrine or whatever to the point that they're fully educated, then they're sent out to disciple others. So this is what the formative period is, and then we're told that this other guy, Saul of Tarsus, comes along, and that Yeshua is giving him some more information, and then Saul takes us back to the disciples and the apostles, and then they're in agreement with him, and then they come up and they start producing these church fathers, which is the next stage in the adaptive period, and the church fathers are the ones that really kind of finalize the doctrine. And then when you enter this traditional period, and the church fathers are passing the information on to the popes and bishops and priests, etc. And so this is like the pre-Protestant Reformation church. This is how the church came to be formed, or so we've been told. However, as times went on in my studies, I've come to the conclusion that it was formulated more like this, where the 12 apostles, the Despozzini, the disciples, then passed on these doctrines to the group known as the Ebionites. And we're not even necessarily even sure that there was an adaptive period. The Ebionites tended to remain in the Near East. They stayed around, the area of Palestine and Syria, and they seem to have held pretty tightly to the traditions taught by Yeshua. They weren't creating a bunch of adaptations to what he taught. So, as I've explored in other presentations, I believe that Saul's Messiah was actually Simon Magus. I've done some previous videos on that. I will put a link in the description of this video if you want to view that information. But this is essentially what the real situation was. There was these two different faiths that were introduced about the same time and grew up side by side. So when you enter the Reform period, for the mainstream church, of course, we had a gentleman known as Martin Luther, and he purported to restore the faith back to the first century. But of course, he was mostly basing his understanding on Saul and some of the church fathers. And so he never really restored it back to Yeshua. He went to these other sources and restored it using these other individuals. So now that brings us over to the true faith, and it's me and you. Like, we're here. The Ebionites are no longer around as far as we know. And so the future is in our hands, right? And so if we're going to restore the true faith, what we need to do is not follow Martin Luther's mistakes, but we need to go straight to Yeshua. And in the areas that we're not able to find all the information from Yeshua, we go to the next best source, which is the 12 apostles, the family of Yeshua, or the disciples. So kind of the motivation or the inspiration for this video came when Yahweh gave me a vision this morning of this slide that you're looking at, and these two parallel lines of these two religions developing side by side. This is what I saw, and this is what I put together to present to you. This is how we restore the true faith if you want to restore the true faith. So we're going to talk about the Reform period in just a minute. So the Reform period is generally begun when some people are frustrated with the perceived meaninglessness of traditional religious forms, and they become reinvigorated by connecting with the functions and values of the religious formative or adaptive periods. And so, like I've said, we need to go back to the formative period and not the adaptive. We need to make sure we don't do that. But I myself, like I feel this statement, this frustration with the perceived meaningless of what I would say is the institutionalized Pauline Christianity. So reform movements, as I mentioned, they seem to fall into one of two classes. The imitative reforms are the attempt to shore up the tradition by reviving certain conventional forms. So a form would be like the ceremonies. So you're not restoring the values, you're restoring just the processes, the sacraments or the prayer service or something like that, but you're not getting back to the heart of the matter, which is the values of the early days of the formative period. This sort of nostalgia for the past is actually quite common. There's nothing quite so conventional as a restored convention. And then you have what's called a creative reform, which actually manages to recover the complex values and meanings from the earlier periods without much concern for retaining traditional forms. So, the value would be like you're feeding widows and orphans. The function is you're going to give money to the widows and orphans. The form would be the organization of the religious community so that they're organized in a way as to fulfill the function and thereby fulfill their value. So when we talk about value, function, and form, this is the meaning we're talking about. So everything should be based on the value. Whatever your value is, the functions that you create and the forms will all work to fulfill that value. But if the value is off and you're just going through the motions of the function and the form, eventually you're going to stop addressing the value. You're going to start using that money for widows and orphans for other things, or finding other charitable causes to put your money into, as an example. So if we were to go back to this slide, and so now let's I mentioned, me and you, like we have a choice, right? So let's kind of flip this around just a little bit. And let's say, okay, me and you, we have these two choices. We have the choice of Yeshua or the choice of Simon Magus and his apostate Saul. Which path do we choose? Do we enter in through this narrow gate, this narrow one-person gate that you might find on a small garden, the narrow gate, or this broad, wide gate that leads to destruction, right? Like, the small gate is closed because you're going to have to go through the process of opening it. This is what Peter talks about in the Nazarene Acts, where he says the truth, it doesn't lie on the surface. You got to kind of dig it out. You got to seek and find. So you got this shut gate, the narrow gate, the one that's hard to find, and then you got this wide open gate that's broad and wide, and it's a gate made for 10,000 plus denominations. Matthew 7:13, enter in by the narrow gate, for wide and deep is the gate of destruction, and many are they that are going through it. For narrow is the gate, and strict is the way that leads straight to life, and few are they who find it. Just by that description from Yeshua in Matthew chapter 7, you can tell that the mainstream Christianity is not where you're going to find salvation, because many find their way through that. It's contrary to what Yeshua said. He said only few are going to find the right path. Matthew 16, I also tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my assembly, and the gates of Sheol will not prevail against it. So if there's a gate of Yeshua, and then there's a gate of Sheol, well, as we've discussed previously, if you were to go into a concordance, and you were to look up Saul's name, his Hebrew name, Shaul, Shaul and Sheol in your concordance are spelled exactly the same. So in Hebrew, when you write Hebrew, vowels are not written, just the consonants. And so Sheol and Shaul, or Saul, are actually spelled the same way. So if the Greek copy of Matthew was copied from the Hebrew Matthew, then this line about the gates of Sheol was originally written in Hebrew. We have numerous testimonies from the early church that the Gospel of Matthew was written in Hebrew, and it was translated later into Greek. So if you were to read the Hebrew Matthew, and it said the gates of Sheol, well, you wouldn't know if that word there is supposed to be Sheol or Shaul. The only way you would know is the context of the verse. And I would submit to you that you have these two opposing gates. You have the gate of Yeshua on the left, and on the right, the gate of Saul, the gate of Shaul, not Sheol. And also, just want to mention that we have a narrative of the martyrdom of James, the brother of Jesus. And in this account, written by Clement of Rome, where he describes the death of James, he says that the scribes and the Pharisees placed James on the pinnacle of the temple, and they cried out to him and said, "You just one, in whom we ought to all have confidence. For as much as the people are led astray after Yeshua, the crucified one, declare to us what is the gate of Yeshua." And James answers with a loud voice and says, "Why do you ask me concerning Yeshua, the Son of Man? He himself sits in heaven on the right hand of Yahweh and is about to come in the clouds of heaven." So I find it really fascinating that the thing that the scribes and the Pharisees ask James when they stick him on the pinnacle of the temple is about the gates of Yeshua. What is the gate of Yeshua? I think that this gate of Yeshua is what we're looking at here. It's what's described in John chapter 10. Starting at verse 1, "Most certainly I tell you, one who doesn't enter by the gate into the sheepfold but climbs up some other way is a thief and a robber. But one who enters in by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Whenever he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. They will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they don't know the voice of strangers." Yeshua spoke this parable to them, but they didn't understand what he was telling them. Yeshua therefore said to them again, "Most certainly I tell you, I am the sheep's gate. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep don't listen to them. I am the gate. If anyone enters in by me, he will be saved, and he will go in and out and will find pasture. The thief only comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that I may have life. I came that they may have life and may have it more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who doesn't own the sheep, sees a wolf coming, leaves the sheep and flees. The wolf snatches the sheep and scatters them. The hired hand flees because he is a hired hand and doesn't care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and I am known by my own. Even as the Father knows me, I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice. They will become one flock with one shepherd. Therefore the Father loves me, because I lay my life down. I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it away from me, but I lay it down by myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. I received this commandment from my Father." And I find it interesting that right after that, we think of the image that we had on the previous screen of these two different divisions within the early faith. These two different paths. Because the very next line And John 10:19 says, "Therefore a division arose among the Judeans because of these words. Many of them says he has a demon and is insane. Why do you listen to him? And others said, these are not the sayings of one possessed by a demon. Is it possible for a demon to open the eyes of the blind?" So this division, I can't imagine that was placed there by accident. This division between people who want to listen to the words of Yeshua and the people who want to listen to someone else's words. That's exactly what we have in the previous slide with these two paths. Those that want to hear the voice of the Master versus those who had rather listen to the voice of the apostate that the Master warned us about multiple times. Nazarene Acts, Book 2, Chapter 22. "And therefore I advise that his justice be first inquired into, that pursuing our journey through it and placed in the way of truth, we may be able to find the true prophet, running not with swiftness of foot, but with goodness of works, and that enjoying his guidance we may be under no danger of mistaking the way. For if under his guidance we shall merit to enter that city to which we desire to come, all things concerning which we now inquire, we shall see with our eyes, being made, as it were, heirs of all things. Understand, therefore, that the way of this course is the way is the course of our life. The travelers are those who do good works. The gate is the true prophet, of whom we speak. The city is the kingdom in which dwells the Almighty Father, whom only those can see who are of pure heart." So Yeshua is the gate through which we get into the kingdom of heaven. "Let us not then think the labor of this journey hard, because at the end of it there shall be rest. For the true prophet himself also from the beginning of the world, through the course of time, hastens to rest. For he is present with us at all times. And if at any time it is necessary, he appears and corrects us, that he may bring to eternal life those who obey him. Therefore this is my judgment, as also it is the pleasure of the true prophet, that inquiry should first be made concerning justice, by those especially who profess that they know God." And that's one of the reoccurring themes that I see coming up, is that we need to know this justice of God. That's the purpose of this whole series. And once again, we start looking into the gates, and right there next to the gate is to seek after God's justice, repeated once again. And finally, the Sermons of Peter, Book 3, Chapter 52. "Wherefore he, being the true prophet, said, I am the gate of life. He who enters through me enters into life, there being no other teaching able to save. Wherefore also he cried and said, Come unto me, all who labor, that is, who are seeking truth, and not finding it. And again, my sheep hear my voice, and elsewhere seek and find, since the truth does not lie on the surface." And that's why we have a narrow gate and we have a wide gate. The narrow gate's hard to find because the truth does not lay on the surface. So thank you for watching. I ask you to please share this video and the other videos in this series with your friends. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. Thank you for listening. Shalom.